It's interesting to hear you say the word local, because I am afraid that the word local no longer exists. In the age of which we live with social media, everyone looking at their phones, it seems every international problem is now a local problem.
Yeah.
What does that do to not just a developing brain, but anyone's brains?
So, I'm going to play the role. I'm a social psychologist who also loves evolution and anthropology. I love looking at what is human nature, how does it vary, and our environments have changed gradually over thousands of years, but all of a sudden things are changing so quickly that a lot of our evolved systems that evolved for life in the physical real world, they're wildly malfunctioning in this virtual world. And so,
is there a specific example of when they malfunction or how they malfunction?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So let's start right in with the biggest area of all, which is relationships. Originally everyone said, social media. Oh, you can connect to everybody. You can have thousands of friends. And when I started this campaign 2 years ago to roll back the phone-based childhood and raise the age for social media to 16, people said, oh, but it's how they connect. It's how they find friendship. Okay, so if you have no understanding of human nature and you just think, hey, if I can connect with 1,000 people, I'll be better off than if I only connect with 3. But that's not the way we work. Human relationships are between people who have bodies. And if you think about what friendship was like when you were a kid, you share food and that bonds you together. You share a lot of laughter. I remember just laughing constantly with my friends and joking. Shared laughter has really deep physiological and even hormonal effects. Whereas liking each other's posts doesn't do it. We move together in time. Girls play patty cake, or we do physical things responding to each other's bodies. And in the process, we come to love that person. Strip all of that away, give every kid thousands of shallow friends, and what do you have? An incredibly lonely, not just generation, but an increasingly lonely world.
Why is the body such an important part of that equation to develop a meaningful relationship? Is there a world where perhaps that was the world we grew up in, but not the world Gen Z or even Gen Alpha grows up in, and that could be okay? Or is the body in a part of the equation that's mandatory?
That's right. In theory, what you say is true. And of course, we haven't lived in the environment that we had, the environment we adapted to or evolved in was the savannas of Africa. Obviously, we haven't lived in that way for a long time. So we are adaptable. But as we've moved to different places, we recreate, we do things. So we create villages. We have a local community. I live here in New York City, and Greenwich Village is kind of you get to know the shopkeepers. So we recreate things. Okay, so why is the body so important? Let's start looking at human beings from a different perspective. We think of ourselves as minds, as brains. We're this great intellect that is sort of on top of this body. Oh, I better take care of my body because that's just like the tool that gets me around. But really, I'm in here, I'm in my head. Well, actually, brains are 500 million years old. They've been evolving for a long time to run bodies. And a lot of your brain is involved in representing the nerves coming in from your body. We think using representations of our bodies. We use metaphors from our bodies. And so to suddenly put people in a world where you're mostly just sitting and looking at a screen, and that's your social life, for adults like you and me, maybe it will be okay. But for kids whose brains are developing and expecting millions of face-to-face social interaction, if you remove 70% of those, the outcome's not going to be good.
Yeah, what's interesting to me in this dilemma, that if I was to make a prediction, I would say that people who would have the hardest time in this current generation would be us, because we didn't grow up with technology around us and we grew up with bodies. So therefore, we're forced to adapt to a new online digital world, and that could be quite hard. Whereas if you're younger and you're growing up in this world, perhaps you're more accustomed to it and more comfortable. But it seems to not be playing out that way.
So again, what you're saying makes a lot of intuitive sense. And 20 years ago, I think a lot of people believed that. And I still hear people saying, oh, but they're going to live in this digital world. Their workplace, they've got to. So let's start them early. If my kid gets started, on social media when he's 7, he'll be really well adapted to master that world when he's an adult. Okay, it may sound a little intuitively compelling. If you start your kid on piano earlier, I guess that will help them go further. But what we're seeing now is that the idea of a digital native was a horrible idea. That if you raise kids without normal social experience, without a lot of running around, without a lot of sunshine, without a lot of normal wrestling and touching, if you raise them with computers instead, that they'll somehow come out better? No. The technology is incredibly easy to use. If you took, Amish kids who or whatever, people who've been raised with no technology whatsoever, and then you put them in this world at the age of 18, how long will it take them to learn to use social media or AI? A few weeks, maybe a few months. And they'll be way ahead because their brains will have developed the ability to pay attention and to have relationships. Whereas what we're seeing, I don't want to overstate it. Look, most kids are not mentally ill. Most kids are okay. But on average, what we're seeing is a generational decline in many really important human abilities. It's common throughout the English-speaking countries. It's common throughout the West, maybe a little bit less so. There's an interesting debate now about why the English-speaking countries are doing worse. We don't yet know about the developing world. But what we're talking about is a reduction in human potential at a scale vaster than has ever been seen in history. I mean, okay, hard to compare to the Black Death and a third of people dying, but at least in modern times, generally speaking, we've increased human capital, we've increased human ability steadily over a couple of centuries, and now it's declining.
Do you think that when children spend a lot of time in this digital world, they become digitally native, that is problematic because they have to spend time in the physical world?
Right, exactly.
Whereas if you become well accustomed to the physical world, you can dabble in the digital world because the physical world is still the majority of the time that you're spending with social situations.
I see what you're saying, but again, I would go further than that. The child, so infancy is this amazing thing. How do you get a large brain into a tiny package that can actually come out through the birth canal of a woman? Okay, that's an incredibly complicated, almost impossible task. And so we have, infancy, and we have this long childhood. The point of the long childhood is to give the brain time to scaffold its development. And so they first have to crawl, and then they can stand, and then they can, you have to go through things in order. And if you just, take a 6-month-old and you say, okay, we're going to skip all that. We're going to go right to, bicycling or driving a car. Like, no, you can't do that. You have to, the brain has to develop skills in a certain order. And if instead of all that physical engagement with the world, kids love to run around, climb things, they need to develop the physical skills of living in a world of predators and prey where what are the games we play as kids? Tag, sharks and minnows. They need to practice all that stuff. And then you get a properly developed human mind that's capable of dealing with the world. The brain changes speed up during puberty. The brain's changing even faster during puberty. And then it slows down. Late teens, it slows down. It's kind of more or less done frontal cortex by age 25. You have to go through that developmental period. If you say instead, we're going to give you the childhood experiences of a cat, or that would make no sense. Right. Your brain wouldn't come out right. And so to say, oh no, we're going to give you the childhood experience of a digital native. No, don't do that. If you want, so here's the thing. Parents, I'll look right at that camera there. Parents, if you want to prepare your child for success in the digital future, protect their brain development in the present from the ravages of a digital childhood. Let them make real friends face-to-face, no AI friends. Let them spend a lot of time with other kids. Let them run and play. If you put them on devices early, you are not giving them an advantage. You are interfering with their brain development, and there's a chance that effect will be long-lasting.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I've seen some criticisms of the idea that the digital generation is being unfairly targeted, that it's not just social media, it's not just digital, there are other factors at play, and perhaps it's how you interact with social media, or are you an individual who is struggling with mental health, therefore seeking out social media? Do you find any of those arguments to be fair?
Well, first of all, there certainly is no unfair targeting of Gen Z. I mean, we're all, my kids are Gen Z. Most of us in this game have kids who are Gen Z or now Gen Alpha, born after about 2011 or so. And so none of this is targeting. All of this is an attempt to turn around trends that are extremely alarming. And as I've traveled around the world talking about this, what I found is that wherever I go, if there is a country in which kids have devices, meaning pretty much every country on earth, you have the same fight within the family. You have the same addiction going on. The devices work the same way on developing brains. Quick dopamine, addiction. That's universal human experience of growing up with touchscreens. That wasn't true for television. Television isn't the quick dopamine, quick addiction thing, but now it is. And so there's no issue of unfair targeting. There's the recognition that technology, we've always had a complex relationship with it, and it's always been mostly positive with some negatives. And my argument is that something new happened by the early 2010s. The smartphone, the touchscreen, all of that has created a digital environment that I think is mostly damaging to development, with some positives.
Do you think it's interesting that I believe last year JAMA published a report on this, pointing out that they believe there's not enough evidence to say that there's a causative relationship between social media and harm to a developing mind?
Yeah.
Their stance, and the author's stance largely, is that there's problematic use and not all screen time is the same, and that there are many who use screen time or high levels of screen time and actually do quite well.
That's all true.
People who use social media to find communities where they are otherwise left out by their peers, they find joy in being on social media and finding that connection. So why do you think that they're not fully saying that there's a causative relationship?
Great. Let's go through it, because it's really important for people to understand a few aspects of the scientific debate here. So let's start with the argument that social media is a lifeline. That's the word you'll hear. Social media is a lifeline for LGBTQ kids. This is a talking point pushed by Meta and others to try to inflame sentiment on the left. And then they say any regulation is censorship. They say that to inflame people on the right. You know what was a lifeline for LGBTQ kids? The internet. If you were gay growing up in a rural area in the 80s, that was horrible. You were isolated. So when the internet came in the 90s, LGBTQ kids, it was a lifeline. They could get information instantly. They could find a variety of places where they could interact with people. And the internet that we had in the 90s, I don't see any sign that that was harmful or toxic. So the internet is incredible, and the internet solved those problems. Now, fast forward to 2012 and later. Now, what do you have? What did LGBTQ kids gain by adding onto the internet an environment in which you have algorithms feeding you stuff and connecting you to men who are sexual predators? Meta has had very lax policies around kicking people off, even involved in sexual trafficking. They had a 17 strikes and you're out policy, according to one of their former employees. So the issue isn't, kids in marginalized communities, we'd isolate them if we took away social media. No, they'd have the rest of the internet. They wouldn't have the worst part. And the research shows very clearly that the people who are most harmed, who say that they are most harmed, are LGBTQ kids. So yes, they use it a lot more. They encounter many more sexual predators. They're much more likely to be sextorted and pulled into sexual trafficking. So please don't confuse social media, which is one of the worst parts, along with gambling and porn and a few others. Don't confuse that with the internet. The internet has a lot of advantages. Okay, now, then the larger point is there is a scientific debate. There are a number of researchers who say, well, they don't say that social media is safe. What they say is there's a correlation. We all agree that people who use it a lot are more mentally ill. Everyone agrees about that. But some say, well, but maybe it's that people who are more mentally ill, they seek it out to find community.
Right.
Okay, well, first of all, that wouldn't explain why, as soon as kids got on social media, around 2012, the girls got on Instagram, wouldn't explain why at that point, then that's when mental health tanked. But even that's a correlation. That's a historical correlation. Right. Two things happen at the same time. What my lab has been doing is we've been gathering the evidence of causality. How do we know that it's not just a correlation? How do we know that it's causal? And actually, this is what we do in science. I mean, this is not an impossible task. Right. So I'll just list, I could spend an hour talking about this, but I'll just list. Here are the different kinds of evidence that it's causal. So first, there are now over 30, my group, we found 38, I think it is, experiments where, random control trial, you ask some people to get off social media, and then you see what happens to their mental health. And overwhelmingly, they find benefits there's not a single measure where we found that it was harmful. So there are experiments, and that's the.
But the issue with those is the short-termness of it all, because the adaptability and plasticity of a mind, showing how perhaps they can feel really great of taking a dopamine break, one of these dopamine vacations, and then after the week, the benefit kind of goes away. Does that say?
Yeah, but the studies only go for a couple of weeks, and there certainly isn't a sign of decay overall. But sure, that's a theoretical possibility. But then we also have the natural experiments. What happens when high-speed internet came into different areas in the late 2000s and early 2010s? It came into like different parts of Canada or Spain or Germany or Italy. I mean, it's a lot of there are 9 or 10 studies now that looked at that at the staggered rollout. And what do they find? My group and 2 totally different groups, all 3 of us have looked at this set of studies. We've all found the same thing. When it came in the years after that, you get an increase in psychiatric admissions, especially for girls and young women. So over and over. So that's another kind of causal evidence. This is not just a correlation. This is a quasi-experiment.
Well, that could be causal evidence that some subgroup could have been harmed at a higher level.
Yeah, young women.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Young women were the first to get hit. Now, we'll talk about boys later because they're hit in a different way. But yeah, if you focus on young women, I think the evidence of causality is now very strong and from multiple sources. But here's the other thing. We're all confined to the correlational studies, the longitudinal studies, the experiments, and the natural experiments. Those are the four areas that we psychologists argue about. But there's so much more evidence, okay? First, what do the kids themselves say? When you talk to older Gen Z and you survey them, are they grateful that they're digital natives? Do they look back and say, wow, social media was great? No, they do not. A lot of them regret it. Very few are grateful to it.
Yeah, I actually saw an interesting point there from Pew. They did some research on this, and it was like 60 or 70% believe that social media was negatively impacting mental health of their friends' local communities. But then the second point of it, which was more interesting to me, is that only 13% believed they were being negatively impacted by that. So I'm curious why that is.
Well, no, I haven't heard numbers that low recently. The most recent Pew that I heard was, I can't remember, it was 20 or 30% of girls said it harmed their mental health. There are different surveys. But look, if you put a consumer product out into the world that 30% of the girls who use it say this has harmed me, any other field, any other industry, they'd be sued to death. But this one had a special exemption from Congress that nobody could sue them until this year. We finally got one case through, and there will be many more to follow. But just to finish up on the evidence, if the kids themselves are saying this is harming us, and they have the front row seat, they're the only ones who really know what's going on. And then who has the next best seat? Meta. They know exactly who saw what and when. My group, we've compiled reports about, there are, is it 28 or 30? Studies that Meta did that came out during the trials in Los Angeles. So Meta's done a lot of research, including an RCT, including a randomized controlled trial of getting kids off social media. So the kids have the best seat, and they say this is causing a lot of harm. Meta and other companies have the second best seat. Their own research shows that they're harming kids, and this is just like the tobacco companies. Their internal research showed harm. Who has the next best seat? The parents and teachers and coaches and therapists. And we've collected all kinds of surveys of them. Good luck finding, more than a couple who think that this is good for kids, especially kids with anxiety problems. So what I'm saying is there's so many different lines of evidence saying this is hurting our kids. And there are still psychologists, I understand we're in a scientific debate, there's still psychologists who say, okay, but I'm not persuaded. It may just be, well, they can't say it's just a correlation anymore because there's so much experimental evidence. Oh yes, so
the multifactorialness of it all.
Of course, okay, sure. Of course, it's multifactorial. Yeah. So people sometimes accuse me of saying Haidt says that 100% of it was caused by smartphones, and every kid of course not. I'm a social scientist. What I'm trying to understand is when you get a generational change, a historical change in the averages from going up to going down, this is a global emergency.
Yeah, and you mentioned that now boys are starting to struggle with the social media world. The Looksmaxxing trend that we discussed earlier. What I'm seeing in my practice is boys coming in with all sorts of body image issues, body image concerns that used to be typical curiosities around puberty or this passing phase of insecurity during puberty, which passes. But now it seems like this transitional phase during puberty insecurity is now becoming a lifelong identity crisis, or at least feels like it. Yeah. You have streamers that are fully cashing in on catching the attention of this age group, 13 to 18 years old, especially in the male community, which is very unusual. That's right. Why do you think that now transition's happening?
Yeah, this is a great example of what we were talking about before, about how you sort of change the environment in which we live and all kinds of weird stuff happens. So elementary school for most kids is fun. It was fun for my kids. It was fun for me, I remember. And then you hit middle school and it's awful. Not for everybody, but it's really different. And because you're leaving the world of just pure play and you're entering a period in where everybody is now evaluating everybody else and themselves. Where do I fit? And now you have very gendered status hierarchies. Because it's at this point, I remember in elementary school, it was already the case that the cool, like the socially prestigious, the dominant boys were the good athletes. It was that simple. If you're a good athlete, you're high. By middle school, it is still very much, it's physical dominance. For girls, it's looks and also social centeredness. Who knows whose secrets? Who's the girl that is sort of the center of things? So you have these new status hierarchies. That's been true for a long, long time before social media. Okay. So suppose you have boys trying to evaluate themselves. Where am I among the other 15 boys in my class? And there are lots of ways that I could be cool or not. And there are lots of different sports that maybe I could be good on. And so I'm not automatically condemned to the basement here forever. And then you put them in a world in which there are all these signals, and it's overwhelmingly based on your looks. Now that was long been true for girls, so it's horrible for girls. But now it's becoming the case for boys, because you don't even get to show off your athletic prowess. It's how do you look? Do you look masculine, tough, dominant? And so to put these poor kids who are suddenly, it's like you were happily enjoying childhood, and now you're thrown into this seething cauldron of middle school and suddenly renegotiating this. And you're looking for guidance to where? To your parents? To the people in your community? No, to the streamers and social media people who are the most extreme, who have been able to garner the most likes. So it's sick. It's cruel. We have to let our kids develop in a relatively normal human social environment. And once again, if you want to prepare your kids for this digital future with so much cruelty in it, don't immerse them in it early. Protect their brain development through puberty.
I've had guests on the show in the past that talked about the aesthetic revolution, the need for being honest with your kids about their appearance, which was a bit shocking to me, but I like to hear people out, even if I disagree with them. Saying how those who are quote unquote ugly live on average a worse life. Their pay is lower. They experience more mental health conditions. They're more ostracized by friend groups. And that by heavily investing into their looks, they can be saved from this or healed from this. I think healed was the word my guest used. What do you take from that?
So it used to be the case that there were multiple ways that you could excel. What you said is absolutely right about one of the stronger prejudices that we have is, stronger than race or gender, or I don't know about gender, but is beauty. We do respond more positively to people who are beautiful or attractive. So there is some truth to that. And so to help your child, become more attractive is not a bad thing, but to frame it around your child that your value is your looks. That's the most important thing. It sounds, again, kind of cruel to me. Our kids need to develop there are different lines of excellence they can develop. And the more you focus it on looks, it's obviously horrible for girls. And now, as you say, it's happening to boys. Can you give us a little bit more detail? Like what are the boys, when they come to you, what do they want to do? What is the psychological effect of this?
The psychological effect that I see playing out is there is an under-discussed male loneliness epidemic, even in younger males.
Yeah.
And when you start exposing them to the people who they look up to, sharing this loneliness and hatred for people isolating them and sharing tips for how they got out of it, it now fuels almost an addictive process of trying to get out of loneliness by doing Looksmaxxing. And to me, that is the exact opposite of what you should do or recommend to someone who is struggling with loneliness.
Yeah.
You encourage them to connect. You encourage them to step outside of their comfort zone and overcome by giving them tools. And those tools are not plastic surgery scalpels and peptide injections.
Yes.
And this is the reality in which we live. Every single day, a teenager, maybe early 20s, individual asks me about peptides to make their skin clearer, to make their muscles bigger, to make their muscles heal faster, recover from exercise. And I don't know where this came from, because it's a hyper optimized version of wanting to look a certain way. But it really takes my mind to the idea of you're not chasing a goal. You got to chase the journey.
Yeah.
And that journey, that friction that we oftentimes discuss of when we talk about the topic of love as an example, it's the friction that makes it special versus what happens with those kids or 20-year-olds when they do get giant muscles. Do they just continue on seeking more and more and more to what end? And it reminds me of when I was growing up, the steroid era was still happening. It was talked about in sports. Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, like it was top of conversation for us, but it was always something that we frowned upon, almost how smoking is today, but yet vaping is cool and pouches are cool. So it's interesting how that shifted. And I think about this almost like bigorexia, where you just constantly want to be bigger, stronger. And I don't know what end. And I don't know that this actually cures or helps with loneliness and all those issues that started the journey to begin with. So I, from a societal perspective, I think social media is definitely adding to this.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
The social psychology that I'll put on the table here is called prestige biased learning. So an interesting way to look at human beings, and this is from in part from Joe Henrich, an anthropologist at Harvard, he points out, he and his team, his advisors, they developed the idea that if you look at humans as learning machines, and the competition in evolution was always who can learn the best, who can learn not just the fat, who can learn the best. What would you build into a mind in order to have children or humans that excel at learning cultural knowledge from previous generations? So one heuristic is copy what's common. When in Rome, do what the Romans do. And so we're very good at saying, oh, what's everyone doing around here? Okay, I'll do that too.
Like trend setting or trend.
Exactly. So
hopping,
trends, yeah. So that's very clearly part of human nature. And kids have always done that. And so if you suddenly expose into a world in which everyone is pumping iron, or everyone is, every boy is talking about his abs, or whatever it is, then they're going to feel like, oh, I need to do that too. But it gets worse because there's a second learning algorithm, or learning, what does he call it? Learning heuristic, called prestige biased learning, which is don't just copy the average, don't just copy what people are doing. Look around. Who do people think is high status? Him? Okay, I'll copy him. And this is the birth of celebrity. And this is why celebrities have hangers on who want to be close to them and soak up things from them and get the credit from them. So the idea that kids as young as 9, 10, 11 will be thrown into celebrity culture where they're supposed to worship, they're going to see that everybody else is pointing to these idols. So I'm going to be like them. Now, any weird goal could be put into your child. And so one weird goal is just be as big and muscular as you can. Now, obviously, that's going to relate to deep evolutionary systems about appraising masculinity. So it's not that it's totally arbitrary, but what kids aspire to be when they hit this period of middle school and puberty is going to be governed by prestige biased learning. So this is one of the main reasons why I think it's so important. Just raise the age for social media to 16. Really, it should be 18. It should be an adult-only activity, talking with strangers and sending photos and videos with strangers, some of whom want sex from you. I mean, this should be an adult activity. But what I've tried to do as a social psychologist is say, look, what we need is a norm that is widely followed. And I thought if I went for 18, we wouldn't get it. But I think 16 we can get. 16 is sort of the end of puberty for, girls are mostly done. Boys are kind of finishing mostly. So just raise the age. I don't want to hear your arguments about, oh, well, but some kids would be able to have this benefit and yeah, sure, some kids could. But this is devastating the entire ecosystem of childhood for everyone. This should not be a part of childhood, nor should gambling, nor should pornography. These should not be normal parts of childhood, but they are. Right now they are. Childhood is shot through with all of these vices because we just let it happen.
When you say social media, how do you define it? Because even I was on the committee for effects of social media on adolescent health for New Jersey that Governor Murphy, the previous governor of New Jersey, put together. And I was on that committee. And one of the biggest struggles we had in creating this report was figuring out, are we going to call WhatsApp social media? Is YouTube social media? Is Netflix social media? Is video games, our video game social media? So I'm curious how you think about it.
So let's talk about social technology. There are technologies that let us be social, like the telephone. Good, no problems. Messaging, texting, WhatsApp, mostly good. If you connect people, mostly good. Weird stuff happens. Kids get into large groups. It takes on some of the feeling of social media. But I've never said anything about restricting kids from WhatsApp or texting or other things like that. Social media, there are a lot of ways to define it, but the prototype is people have a profile that anyone can look up. They post content. That's the key thing. Users are generating the content. TV studios have to pay a lot of money to make content, but what Meta and others discovered is, hey, let's just sort of motivate people so that they'll make all the content that other people come to see. And then you have users communicating. So there's a variety of features that put you into contact with people in this weird way in which, especially if a lot of the contact is one-to-many. So if you're texting a friend, fine. If you're using WhatsApp with a small group, that's great, no problem. But if you are now trying to gain followers by doing whatever it takes to get followers, you are now putting yourself in a Skinner box. So B.F. Skinner, behaviorist, found that if he created special boxes where he could train rats or pigeons very, very quickly by giving them, you could click a button, give them a reward every time they did a little something that he wanted, then they do a little more, then they turn a little further, and eventually he taught them how to play ping pong. He did amazing things. You can train animals very quickly if you can give them quick rewards. And once you put kids into an environment in which they're trying things and looking at the response, trying things, looking at the response, they're in a Skinner box. And who has the button giving them rewards? It ain't you as the parent. It's whoever is the most, weird and extreme. And
Right.
Now, I don't want to knock people with lots of followers. Some people earned it, but a lot of kids are in a desperate race to do whatever it takes
So
to
it's
get